Hello everyone, and welcome to today's CPD, which is going to be a follow-on from the work that we started last Wednesday during Inset. And just a reminder that this half-term CPD is going to be focusing on common routines to ensure high expectations for behaviour for learning in the classroom. So we're looking at procedural routines that we'd like everyone to adopt across the school, so that students are certain about how to do things in certain situations during the lesson, and that they're the same across the whole school. And just a reminder of why we're adopting these common routines. So it's to ensure consistency across the school, and that has been a request from all staff, and quite rightly so, to give students a greater certainty, and staff greater certainty of what to do when a teacher is talking, or when they're working independently, or at the start or end of a lesson. And all of this is to ensure that we enhance the learning potential in every lesson, and ultimately to improve student outcomes, which is the whole point of us getting better at our teaching. So just a reminder then of the way that we've been approaching this in terms of routines. So we've talked about the Rodborough Flow lesson model that has 4 parts. And last Wednesday, we reminded each other of the work that we did last year on the start and the end of a lesson. And today, really, what we're going to be doing is looking at the middle parts of a lesson, which either consist of strong deliberate instructions, which is when the teacher is teaching, or when the students are working, so strong deliberate practice. So we're going to be focusing the first part of this afternoon CPD on the strong deliberate instructions. So we're going to revisit STAR, and also think about what do we expect students to be doing during periods of teacher talk, either extended or shortened periods of teacher talk following a STAR transition. And then moving on from that, we're going to then think about when students are working by themselves, either in groups, independently, or in pairs, what do we expect them to be doing across the board? And what are the common routines that we expect them to be adopting, or we expect them to be adopting across different subjects in different lessons? So we're going to make a start with STAR. So obviously we know that STAR was introduced last year, and we did quite a lot of work on STAR with both students and staff about what STAR is and how to actually use STAR. So this is really a reminder for all staff. And if you're new to Rodborough, hopefully you will have heard of STAR in your induction, but also just to be aware that Year 7s, if you've not been using STAR with your students, they won't be aware of it. They may have had a little introduction, but really we need to be kind of all using STAR. And one of the key things that we've noticed in the first half term is the inconsistency in which staff and students are using and responding to STAR. And this is a good time to kind of revisit it, ensure everybody's happy with it, and as of tomorrow, really go for it in terms of STAR. So STAR, first of all, what is STAR and when do I use it? So in effect, STAR is a transition tool, and it's a tool for attracting students' attention in a transition period. So a transition is any time you move from one learning activity to another in a lesson. So that could be from you talking to them doing, or them doing to you talking. So it's a mechanism to attract their attention so that you can go from one transition to the other. Okay. It's a technique you want to use every time you want students' attention, like we've said, and you want them to be silent and listening to you. And for that reason, it means that you may use STAR several times across the lesson. So if you think about how many transitions there are in the lesson, how many times you stop because you want students to either listen to you or to their peers, that is however many times you use STAR. So it's not that you use it at the beginning and then forget about it. You need to be using it consistently throughout the lesson, and also need to be using it consistently across all your lessons so that students get used to you using it. So what is STAR? What does it stand for? So it's an acronym, and basically it stands for it's asking the students to sit up straight, track you or the board, have an answer ready, being cognitively active and listening to you, and respecting through silence, i.e. not talking to each other. And if you remember last year, we produced this and we shared this with staff and students, and we encouraged you to use this in your lessons, okay, especially when you were getting students used to using STAR, and it gave them an idea of what the expectations were at each stage of STAR. So sitting up straight, pens down, Chromebooks closed, and no fiddling with anything in their hands. Tracking the teacher or the board, so that means I should be on you or the board, not out the window, and no turning around of any description. Answer ready is cognitively active. So it might be that you're not asking them to answer a question, but you want them to be listening to you. So they need to be listening actively to what you're about to do or what you're about to say. And throughout this whole thing, to ensure this works, they need to be respecting through silence. So they mustn't be talking. Okay, so this is the state you want them to get to when you are about to talk to them. So how do you use STAR? And so last year we talked about the fact that actually, in order for any routine to be embedded with students, you need to model it, okay? So this very much depends on you training the students as to how to use STAR. Now, last year we did whole school assemblies with the year groups that we had last year in terms of how to do STAR. So when a teacher calls for STAR and uses the countdown, what do we expect to see from the students? Now, obviously, we've not done that this year, so but it is an expectation now that you are using STAR in your lessons. So if you've not done so and you're concerned that students aren't very clear about what STAR is, what my suggestion would be this week that you take some time in each of your lessons to actually go through STAR, explain it to them, and then rehearse it with them. So model it to them until they've got the hang of it. Now, alongside that, there's a countdown and a script using positive language, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. And it may be that you need to go through the entire script to start with, and then a couple of weeks or a couple of lessons down the line, you might need to minimize your script, and maybe you call for STAR and then 3, 2, 1. Or then ultimately, your ultimate goal is that you want to get to a position with your classes where you just need to use the word STAR. Can I have STAR? And students slowly, or students rapidly, I should say, adhere to the expectations of STAR. Okay. So to start with, you want to be reminding students of what STAR is. You want to be modeling it to them and explaining it with maybe with the diagram. You want to be narrating it to them with the script. Then you want to be moving to a shorter narration of STAR. Can I have STAR in 3, 2, 1? And then finally, when they've cracked that, you want to be using STAR on its own. And this may take a week, may take a couple of weeks, it may take a couple of lessons, okay? But that's the aim of what we want to be getting to, or that's the goal that we want to be getting to with STAR, with all your classes. So that's year 7 to year 11. So in terms of the script, I shared this with you last year, but I'm going to I would encourage you to have a read of this, okay, in your own time and potentially practice it. And you may not want to use it verbatim, the script. You may want to pick bits out that you like and pick and amend it. There are some non-negotiables of the routine that I'm going to share with you in just a moment of what you need to do and you need to say and what we would expect to see across the school. But in terms of the script, you might want to adapt it, okay? But in terms of like the key points of the script, the first section of the script is a narrated countdown. Key point to observe here is the pausing that has to happen in between each narration, okay? Especially the first time you do it, and even later on when you're just using the numbers, okay? But if you're asking for students to have STAR in 3, okay, sitting up straight, at that point you would pause, wait for compliance, full compliance, before you go on to 2, pens down, eyes looking at me or the board, again, pause, wait for compliance, and then 1, thank you for respecting through silence, and expecting all students to wrap up their conversations, okay? During your verbal cues, you might want to include some non-verbal cues, particularly when you're pausing and scanning the room, okay? All the non-verbal cues that teachers use, okay, with their hands or moving towards students or with their eyes to encourage them to comply with the expectations. The second part of the script is about what to say in between the different parts of the countdown to ensure compliance. So these are sentences you might want to include, okay, if you're still waiting for silence, or you're still waiting for students to put their pens down, or you're still waiting for students to finish their conversations. And then finally, okay, making sure that you include praise, okay, preferably anonymously, but I've seen some of you do it with students' names, which is excellent. But going around and saying thank you to those students who finished their conversation. Thank you, Bessie, for starting your din. Okay, so lots of positive praise to encourage students to comply with the expectations of STAR. So again, have a read of the script, and you may want to adjust it for your purposes. Some of you may be really skilled at this and you've been using STAR all along and you don't need the script. If this is the first time, or you're not confident in using STAR, practice the script in your head, okay, and then practice it with the students and amend it and adjust it depending on the classes and the students in front of you. Now, having said all of that, okay, or actually, before we go on to the non-negotiables, I want to go to the next routine for periods of deliberate instruction, and this is what our expectation is of what students and staff should be doing during any periods of extended or even shortened teacher talk. So this should ordinarily follow after a STAR has been called. So you've called for STAR, you've got students listening to you, and then what do we expect students to be doing, and what do we expect from staff when they are talking to students, okay? So this is not when students are doing anything, this is when they're actually listening to you and listening to you do an explanation or an exposition or modelling or questioning. So if we look at some step-by-step guidance, and again, I'm going to go through these, and I would encourage you to go back through them, okay, just to double check that you're happy with them. So the first thing is you've called for STAR. At this stage, students should be looking at you or the board, or looking at whatever you want them to look at. They're silent, they're cognitively active, they've got nothing in their hands, and that's really important. They've put everything down, and they're not disturbing others or looking out the window. So you've got their full attention. So once that's happened, the next thing is you need to be thinking very carefully about your position. So you will have already done this if you know you're going to launch into a period of explanation or some modelling. Think very carefully about your position. So are you going to be standing near the board? Do they need to see you and the board? Are you going to be sitting at the back of the classroom on the visualizer, in which case you want them to be looking at the board? How are you going to monitor that those students are looking at the board? Okay, and not fiddling with their pens. So you need to be thinking about that. Do you want them to gather around you because you're going to be modelling something, or you're going to be demonstrating something? How are you going to ensure that all students, okay, around you can actually see what you're doing? So think carefully about your position, and then give them specific instructions if you want them to move in a particular place. So that should happen straight after you've got STAR, okay? Once you've got them in the right position and they're quietly listening to you and they've got nothing in their hands and they're looking at you or looking at what you want them to look at, you then go into your explanation, your modelling, your questioning, your demonstration, whatever it is. In this period, you want to be doing some formative assessment through questioning, targeted questioning, preferably, where you are working out if they're A, with you, okay, still with you, and B, whether they've understood and they're making the learning, or they're doing the learning that needs to be done. Okay, we're going to do a bit more work on formative assessment and questioning in January, but at this stage, you want to be doing some questioning, okay? You want to be including some of that in your explanation, okay, to ensure, A, that they're still with you, but B, that they're understanding and they're making the progress you want them to make during your modelling or your explanation or your questioning. Now, finally, and this is important, if at any point during your explanation or your modelling or your questioning or any period of teacher talk, you want them to move from the STAR position to them either having something in their hands or doing something or moving towards something, you need to, at this point, make it really, really clear to them and make it explicit of when to do that and how to do that. Don't leave it to chance. So you've got them in a STAR position, they've got nothing in their hands, and you want them to write something down. So at this point, you would say, right, in a moment, when I say the following, I want you to pick up your pens, wait for them to pick up their pens, and then write the following down. Or pick up your highlighters, highlight the following. Or pick up a ball, or do whatever, and then pause and watch them do that. So it needs to be really controlled by you as to when you want them to do something, because they've moved from listening to you quietly to doing something. Okay, so that needs to be controlled by you during any period of teacher explanation. So hopefully those steps are pretty straightforward in terms of expectations of STAR and teacher talk. In terms of non-negotiables, so we did a little bit of this on Wednesday with entry and exit routines, but in terms of non-negotiables for STAR followed by teacher talk, these are the kind of main non-negotiables. So for STAR, we want everyone to use the word STAR. I know last year there was a little bit of discussion about whether we use the word STAR with year 11 because maybe they were a little bit too old for it and they didn't need it. That doesn't apply this year because all students that we have in the school will have been introduced to STAR last year, including the current year 11s, last year's year 10s. They will be very familiar with the word STAR. So for consistency in your use of, in your instruction of STAR, you have to use the word STAR. Okay, whether it's just the word STAR or STAR followed by a script, STAR needs to feature. The second non-negotiable is that you need to insist on full compliance of the 4 requirements of STAR. So that is sitting up, tracking you or the board, or whatever you want them to track, pens down, no fiddling, everything down, and then cognitively active, which usually is signaled by them looking at you and not talking to each other. Okay, so full compliance of those 4 requirements. And then the final non-negotiable in terms of STAR is the idea that you do not move on until you've achieved full compliance, or that you go back to and remind students if they are infringing any of those requirements. Okay, so you've got STAR, you've got them doing that, you start teacher talk and they pick up a pen. The expectation is that you pause, you ask them to put their pen down, you use either verbal or non-verbal cues to do that, and then you move on. So not moving on and not letting it go, okay, is really, really important. So those are the non-negotiables for STAR, particularly for STAR and for teacher talk. For teacher talk, the non-negotiables, once you've got them in the STAR position, is your careful positioning, thinking very carefully about where you're going to position yourself in the room and whether it's important that they either see you or the board or the thing or whatever, and that you can still direct the room from where you are positioned. And final non-negotiable is giving them explicit instructions when you want them to move from the STAR mode to any other mode, i.e. if you want them to pick something up, to write something, to do something, to say something, it's really important that you are in control of that and you direct them and you don't leave it to chance, okay, and that you watch them do it and pause and re-instruct them, okay, if they're not doing it. All right, so those are the non-negotiables for those periods of the lesson where you are doing some deliberate instruction. So at this stage, what I would do is I would pause and I would go back through the slides and I would have a look at those just to ensure that we're happy with those 2 routines. There is also a video for STAR, which I will make available. And in due course, we're hoping to do some videos of our own for teacher talk and the other routines that we're about to introduce. So now what we're going to do is think about the periods of the lesson where the teacher is not instructing, but the students are actually practicing. Okay, so when you have finished your teacher talk or you've done your periods of teacher talk and so on and so forth, the next phase will be when they're either going to be working independently or in groups or pairs. Okay, so that's mainly the 2 modes or the 3 modes that students will be working in. And what I've done here is I've put together some step-by-step guidance for all those different modes. And also I've put together some pictorial diagrams or some kind of turned it into some visual cues that you can use with your students. So once you've listened to this, look at the slides, and in particular look at the icons that we'd like you to start using with your students to indicate to them whether they're going to be working independently or in pairs or groups and what that actually means for them. So if we think about working independently, okay, So the start of this would be that you would need to give students explicit instructions of working independently. You need to say to them, you're about to go into a period of independent work. This often follows a period of where you have done some teacher talk and you've formatively assessed them, and you are confident that they are ready to embark on a period of independent work, and you're confident that their knowledge and their skills are sufficient at that point so they can have a go practicing quietly by themselves. So once you've told them that they're going to be working independently, before the start of any independent practice, so before they do anything, we would like all teachers and all colleagues to ensure the following, okay? So first of all, that the students are clear of the requirements of the task or activity, so that you've explained this in full. They're clear what resources and guidance they can draw on, okay? This can either be on the board, in the classroom, in a textbook in front of them, it doesn't matter, but they're clear about that. They're clear as to how to present or set up the work, okay? So if they're writing an essay, how do you want them presented? Do you want them writing in pen or pencil? Do you want them using a ruler? Do you want them sticking something in? Do you want them highlighting something, underlining something? They've got to be clear about that before they engage in any independent work. And that finally, they're clear about the time limit that they're going to be given. Is it 10, 15, 20 minutes? They're really clear. And preferably there's some sort of indication of that up on the board, or you've drawn their attention to the clock and that you would say to them, you've got till this time. Now, obviously, when you're setting that independent work up, you need to be ensuring these things, and you need to be using targeted questioning to ensure that they are clear about this and they've understood it. And also encourage them to ask you questions for clarification. And it's really important that you say to them, I want these questions now, because when you start working independently, I don't want lots and lots of hands up, okay? Your opportunity is now to ask for clarification, and this is your chance, as well as a teacher, to ensure they've all got it. And check in with the most vulnerable students, or with the least able, or those that have learning needs, that actually they've understood the activity as well, and that they're ready to engage in independent work. We're now going to look at what happens during that period of independent work, okay? So during a period of deliberate practice, these are the following expectations of students, and this is where you're going to need to do a bit of training with the students, because this will, for some of them, this will be common practice in your lessons, but for some, if they're not used to working like this, you will need to insist on this, and it may take a couple of lessons or a couple of goes, okay, to ingrain this in them. So during independent deliberate practice, students should assume the following, okay? Number one, they need to work on their own and in complete silence. So that means no talking, no turning around, no looking out the window, no distracting others. And again, you might want to question them about that. You know, what does working in silence mean? What should I be looking out for if you are working on your own? What should you not be doing if you are working in silence? What should you not be doing if you're working on your own? Okay. Make sure that students know that they need to draw on the guidance and resources provided, and that has already been explained, and not you during that period of independent practice. And finally, that the expectation is that they have a go, okay, as hard as it may be, that they have a go without immediately asking for help, okay, and that you wait a while before you launch in and help, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And we're calling this stage productive struggle, okay, where they really have a go by themselves before they call for help, okay, and that they will have asked all the questions they need to ask beforehand, and that this is their time to actually shine and show you what they can do. Now, when the students are working and you've set them off and they're clear about how the modes of working, okay, during this period, we're asking teachers to do two things. First of all, at the start of the activity or independent practice, we're asking you to assume a position of pastor's perch. Now, some of you may already know about this, or you've come across this. This is a Doug Lemoff Teach Like a Champion technique, named after one of his colleagues that he saw use this technique, which effectively it just means that once you've set them off on an activity, you assume a position in the room where you can scan the room, and you just wait, okay, for a good 5 minutes. You just wait and watch them settle into their work, okay. that allows you the time to look at, see who needs a hand and who's settling and who's not, but also gives them the chance to actually get stuck in and have a go, okay? And they know that you're not going to intervene at this stage, and you've made it clear. Now, again, for some of you, this will be hard, and it's definitely hard for me, and this will require training, okay, for you and your students to know that this is going to happen at the beginning of any period of independent work. Once the 5 minutes are over, then what we'd like staff to do is to purposely circulate. Now, obviously, lots of you do this already, but during that period of independent practice, you're purposefully circulating around the classroom. And that could be for 3 reasons. You're doing some formative assessment of their work, for behaviour for learning reasons, and you're using verbal and non-verbal cues to get them back on track, but also to remind them of logistics. Okay, things like, can I remind everybody to underline their title? Can I remind everybody to use a highlighter? Can I remind everybody, or can I draw everybody's attention to this page in the textbook? So purposefully circulating the classroom, and this is where you would be picking up on any of those students who are struggling, or who may have got something wrong, or who are going on the wrong track, and this is where you would pick them up. So those are the 4 kind of parts to independent deliberate practice. In terms of communicating this with students, we'd really encourage you to use this icon to symbolize independent learning. And if everybody uses this icon either on their slides, or to when you're modeling this with them, or you're teaching them how to do this, okay, they will rapidly learn that this icon means independent practice by themselves. And like we did with STAR, okay, you can use a slide to help you communicate the expectations. So working independently means in complete silence, no talking, no turning around and disturbing others, using resources and instructions provided, not relying on the teacher, and then finally, engaging in that productive struggle. Have a go by yourself first before you ask for help, if you ask for help at all. So the final part, or the final routine that I wanted to share with everybody, is what are our expectations of students working in pairs or groups, okay? And this is similar to independent practice in the way that it's set up, but obviously they're going to be engaging in discussion, and they're going to be engaging in cooperation here, and it's going to have some differences. And this is going to also look quite different in different subjects. And in a moment, I'm going to talk about how we adapt maybe some of these routines to the nuances of our own subject, like we did start and exits. Some of us may need to adapt them, but I'm going to give everybody some general guidance of the expectations for students working in pairs or groups. So, like deliberate independent practice, if you want students to be working in pairs or groups, you need to signal that to them. So you've got them in a STAR position, you've done a period of teacher talk, you formatively assess them, you think they're ready, well, you know they're ready to go on to the next phase of the lesson. And this is where you will say to them, you are now going to be working in groups, or you're now going to be working in pairs. And this is my expectation, okay? So prior to any of them doing any work in pairs or groups, you need to make the following clear to them. So first of all, you need to have considered the logistics and the mechanics of the group or pair work. Now, often if you're doing paired or group work in a lesson, you will have pre-planned this, okay? Because group work in particular requires pre-planning of groups and careful consideration of where they're going to move in the room, who's going to be working with who, and how long they're going to be working for. All of that needs to have considered prior to that. If you're doing pair work, okay, again, you need to spend some consideration. If you're doing simply a period of, think, pair, share, this won't necessarily apply, because you're just going to ask them to work with the person next to you. But if you're asking them to work in pairs that they're not used to, or they're doing a prolonged activity in pairs, okay, again, you need to have thought about all of that and the logistics and plan that out prior to the lesson. When you're with them, you want to explicitly tell them the following. What does the task or activity entail that they're going to be doing in pairs or groups? What resources and guidance can they draw on? How you expect them to work. Now, this is important. Now, at this point, you might say to them, I want every group to allocate a role, or you may allocate them a role. In your role, I expect the following. In your pairs, I expect one person to be listening, one person to be talking. So whatever the activity is, you need to explicitly tell them how you expect them to work prior to them engaging in that activity. And then finally, you want to give them the time limit. Now, when you are doing all of this and you're setting that work up, again, you want to be using some targeted questioning to ensure that they know what they're doing and that they all understood. And you want to encourage them to ask you questions so that they don't start the group or pair work and then have no idea what they're doing, okay, or come across problems that they haven't thought through, okay? So you've set the activity up, you've pre-planned your groups or pairs, you've given them the instructions, you've thought about how you want them to explicitly work and what each person is going to be doing in that group or pair work. And then when they are actually engaging in group or pair work, these are the expectations of the students themselves. They have to work in the way that they've been instructed. So if you've asked them to come up with a role each, or you've allocated them a role and you've given them clear instructions of what that role entails, you expect to see them working in that role, okay? And that's where you can hold them to account when you're purposefully walking around the classroom. If you've asked them to share, or you've asked them to contribute equally, that's the same thing. So again, you've set it all up and then you expect, you're saying to students, I expect to see this now when you're working in pairs or groups. Students are expected to draw on the guidance and resources that have been provided. And again, like independent practice, they're expected to have a go by themselves and engage in that productive struggle and not give up. And you want to explain that to them at the start. Whilst they're doing their paired or group work, similar to independent practice, we would suggest that initially you assume pastors perch, just watch them get into their groups. Now, that might not be realistic or feasible for every subject. So if you're setting up a science experiment, for example, you may not be able to do this because you may need to be the person actually coordinating all the equipment, or you may need to be standing at the goggle section, or you may need to be handing out the balls in PE. So you can't do that. But if you can, it's the idea of standing back and watching them getting to their roles and their groups. Once you've done that and the setup has started and they're working, purposefully circulating, okay? Same as independent practice, but this time, obviously, they are going to be much more vocal, much more active, and it's about ensuring that they're on track. You're formatively assessing them, reminding them of things, and also ensuring that their behaviour for learning is acceptable, i.e. that they're working in the way you want them to work. They're not off track and they're not talking needlessly about something else. Okay, just some basic guidance of the routines we'd like everyone to adopt for when students are working in pairs or groups. In terms of communicating this with students and training them, similarly, I've got a slide here with some diagrams that we'd like you to use with the students. So that's the icon that we'd like you to use in your teaching when you're saying to them, you're now about to move into paired or group work, okay? And paired or group work basically means work is instructed, and you've explained that to them, use the resources and instructions provided, and engage in productive struggle. Okay, those are the three key things that we want students to be doing, and that's what you're going to need to do a bit of training on with your students. And again, like independent practice, this may take a little while. For some of you, this is oiled and slick, and you do this anyway. For some other people who maybe don't do a lot of paired or group work, okay, this may take a little while and your classes will need training. But the important thing is, if we all adhere to the same principles, okay, of independent practice and group and paired practice, students should see a consistency across the school, okay, in that they've been explicitly told they're going to move into that mode, they've been told what how to work and what to draw on and how to present their work, they've been told what they need to be doing in that mode, and then the teacher monitors it. Okay, those are the kind of the flow of those modes of learning. Now, before we finish this afternoon, I also wanted to share with you a final routine that we would like as much as possible colleagues to adopt across the school. for when they want students to engage in talking, okay? And it's a routine that is commonly used across the English department. Now, the good news is, because the English department use it, students will be very, very well versed in how to conduct this. So this is an easy one to adopt across all subjects, for any periods where you want them to discuss something. Now, this is more appropriate if they're working in pairs, but also it can be done in group work. Okay, so you might need to think about how you would do it. But by using the term turn and talk, which they're very used to doing in English, this is an easy way for you to get them to engage in discussions. And thank you to Lucy for emailing me the instructions. But basically, the key principles of turn and talk are as follows. And I'm hoping to video one of the English teachers so that we have a video of how this actually works in practice. But you are welcome to go and watch one of the English teachers do this, because it's really powerful. So first of all, explicitly introduce turn and talk, okay, by saying something along the lines of, in a moment, I will be asking you to turn to your partner and talk about X, or discuss X for this amount of minutes. Make it clear the purpose of the discussion. Why are they engaging in this discussion? The reason you're doing this is because it's going to lead to this, because it will help you do this, because it will help set up the following. Now here, this is where you make it really clear and you narrate your expectation. Now, again, remember, the English department use this all the time, so students are very, very familiar with it, okay? So narrate your expectation. During turn and talk, I expect you to have turned your face to face your partner, and I expect for you to be taking it in turns to talk, and I expect to hear the following as I circulate. So make those expectations really clear. Now, the English department have oracy stems, sentence stems that they use with them. If you are planning a particular essay, you want them to answer a question a particular way, and you have command words you want them to use, this is where you would make them aware of this, and you say, in your discussion, I expect to see or hear the following, and make that clear at the beginning. Finally, really important, you time bond the discussion, okay, and you circulate, ensuring everybody is participating. Okay. Now, in terms of an icon you can use with the students, this is the icon that is used in the English department. So students will be very familiar. When this goes up, they know that this is turn and talk. And what I've done, and I hope the English department don't mind, I've added a couple of different other icons or instructions around the side for those of us who are trying to use it for the first time, or who want to remind students of the expectations. So when you turn and talk, you turn to your partner, you follow the instructions you've been given, you talk about the actual thing you've been given, use the sentence stems or the command words provided, and focus on the question or topic. Now, you're welcome to use those additional points or just use the icon in the middle because the students are used to it. Now, there's a lot of information there, and thank you very much for listening. What I would suggest is that you spend a little bit of time now just digesting that information. There are printouts of each of the routine, which I will put in everybody's pigeonhole over the course of this week. Next week's SPDS, we're going to ask all subjects to do the same thing that we did on Wednesday, which is to think about these routines and think about how are they going to become embedded in your practice, and what are the nuances of your particular department or your particular subject that might mean that you might need to adjust some of the routines. Okay, and tomorrow's afternoon's training with middle leaders will focus on that and how to plan that SPDS session. Okay, but for the time being, I'd like everybody to have a look at this again, to start to implement it this week. Definitely everybody should be using STAR because we've introduced this already, and everybody should be insisting on the routine for teacher talk. Independent practice, group practice, and paired practice, you might want to do that over a couple of lessons because you're going to need to train the students in this. Now, Hannah and I are going to hopefully do some assemblies next week or some tutor times next week, instructing students of these modes of learning. But in the meantime, we'd really ask staff to have a go. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. And any questions, please do get in touch or get in touch with your subject leader who can bring the questions to their training. Thank you.